webinar on environment, social and governance, or ESG. My name is Claire Cameron, and I'm one of the directors here at PAI. Public Administration International is a London-based international development consultancy and training organisation, and we specialise in strengthening governance worldwide. So our webinar really introduces the concepts around ESG. Sometimes they appear to be quite complex, but our presenter, Dr. Peter Boulding, who is with us, will run through and explain a little more. And it looks at how ESG ideas and practices are being introduced in international organisations such as the UN, as well as in public and private sector organisations, really with a view to strengthening all of those organisations and making them more sustainable. So Peter's got wide experience in these areas, both in the UK and internationally. So he'd be happy to share his ideas and experience with us. But before we do that, I'm going to ask my colleague Amanda to just run through the webinar software and explain how it all works, how to ask questions, and take part in a few poll questions that we have. And then I'll see you all towards the end. But thank you again for joining us. I think it's fantastic. We've got people, I think, from Africa, Caribbean, the Pacific, Europe, and Asia. So I guess it's a sort of good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. But thanks again for joining, and look forward to seeing you a bit later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. So yes, I'm just going to go through some very quick admin details. On the left-hand side, you'll see a questions box, a poll box, a chat box, and a handout box. Please do put your questions for Peter in the question box, as we'll be doing a Q&A session after the webinar is finished. We will be launching polls throughout as well, so please do participate in that. For the chat box, please do talk amongst yourselves, pick up any, you can put questions in there as well, and please do speak to myself and my colleagues as well, as we will be monitoring the chat box. And in the handouts box, you'll have a copy of the slides and also a link to our ESG workshop that is taking place in October. Peter, I'm going to hand over the controls to you now, so you'll get a little prompt, and then we can start with the webinar.
Thank you, Amanda. That's great. Yeah, I've just pressed the right button, I hope. And welcome, everybody. It's nice to be speaking to such an international audience from across the globe, and I hope that you enjoy this session and take something away from it, but also contribute as well, because that's the whole point. A webinar is not just one-way traffic. It should be at least two-way, if not more. The topic we're talking about, as Claire so kindly introduced it, environment, social and governance, the three pillars to build a strong, sustainable organisations. And this is a very germane topic, as we know, going forward. In the introduction, I'm just showing you what's going to happen during this session. There's so much to consider. It's almost impossible, given that I'm going to speak for about 40 minutes. But please do bear with me on that in that way, because there's just a huge agenda here, and it's very lively and very happening at the moment, and things are changing as we speak almost instantly. But please take these things on board. Basically, I'm going to do a presentation. We've got some poll questions which will hopefully illuminate where people are at the moment and what they're thinking about. And then we'll have the opportunity to ask questions as we go forward. This is, as I said before, a new paradigm for many professionals. I'm a finance professional at heart, a former auditor, and I'm in the accountancy profession. But for us, it's been a big leap forward from just dealing with numbers and for financial performance to now considering whole new sets of concepts, particularly in the environment and the social areas as well. And these are new for us all, and we're trying to take them on board and develop our approach accordingly. The concepts really derive from the United Nations initially on the debate about sustainability. And sustainability, as we come to look at in future slides, is really a sort of a shorthand version for environment, social, and governance, and we'll deal with that as we go forward. But please take account of this all. So let's just kick off with the first poll question. I'm going to hand over to Amanda, and she will introduce the question and tell you how to respond.
Thank you, Peter. So I'm just going to launch the poll question now. So please do, participate in this. So the question is, how familiar are you with ESG issues? So A is totally, B is partially, C in a limited way, or D not at all. So I'll give a few more seconds and then I will close the poll. Got a few more coming in. Just give that a few more seconds. Okay, so I'm just going to show the results to everyone. So we don't have any answer for A. We've got 25% for B, partially. We've got 60% C in a limited way, and we have 15% for D, not at all.
Oh, right. That's very interesting. So there is definitely awareness in some respect or others for the ESG issues. I suppose that's reflective of the fact that people are willing to come on the webinar. So that's interesting and good. But let's hope we can get people moving up from C to B and hopefully to be A in the not too distant future. As I said before, this is a very dynamic situation and things will change a lot. Even this year, we will see things moving forward. So let's go on. So we'll kick off with the discussion about sustainability, and sustainability as its most general nature is this definition from the United Nations, and I'll read it out to you because I think it's important, especially if you're not able to see the slides. I'm assuming most of you can. Please let us know if you can't see the slides. Sustainability meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, this is a very generic sort of definition, but it does include all the issues we're talking about here, not just in the financial sectors, but across the whole of the area that we're talking about. So it's a very, very broad definition, but basically meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future is what it's all about. And we'll come to look at this as we go forward and look further on. I hope people can accept this definition as something that they can live with. As I said before, ESG is longhand for sustainability, so that's where the two meet. The two concepts are very connected in with each other. Let's go on. Now, I'm sure many people here are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, which arose from the United Nations some years ago, and they have a history of not being achieved in total, and some more than others. And perhaps the one that's most applicable is number 16, which is called Peace and Access to Strong Institutions. That's a very home ground for a lot of the issues that we'll be talking about today. And that one is the one that's probably at least being achieved, as we see across the world in so many conflict situations and so many stresses and strains going on. But the others refer to all sorts of attributes of development, and they're all very virtuous and valuable. And I think they do have value in themselves, and for setting an agenda. Even though that agenda may not be met, it's still an agenda that's worth looking at. So I think we'll move on from there, but I hope you're all familiar with those. And if not, there is in the United Nations websites, there's lots of information about these, and there's reports every year about how they've been achieved or not. So please have a good look at that if you're interested. These are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. It's a high-level framework, which more desirable than achievable, in my opinion, but is certainly there to be looked at and considered, and not to be ignored. But is it threatened by the new world order? Question mark. There's a new world order emerging very quickly and rapidly following the elections in America, and we will come to talk a little bit about that as we go forward. But there is a consensus of scientific opinion that a lot of these sustainable development goals are worth looking at. So again, Amanda, it's now time for the second of our poll questions.
No worries.
Which follows on. Thank you.
No worries. I'm just going to launch this poll now. Same as before, I will read out the question for you. So how mature is your sustainability reporting process? A, very mature. B, somewhat mature. C, not very mature. D, immature. Or E, we do not undertake sustainability reporting. So again, I will give everyone a couple of seconds just to report in. And just to let everyone know, the polls will remain open. So if anybody has missed the chance to actually go in to use one of the polls, they do remain open. So I can actually check again at the end of the webinar as well. Just give it a few more seconds. I think we've still got a few more coming through. Okay, so we've got 9% that say A, very mature, 18% B, somewhat mature, 27% C, not very mature, 9% saying D, immature, and we have 38% saying E, we do not undertake sustainability reporting.
Well, that's very very commendable in many ways. There's all sorts of a big range of responses there. But sustainability reporting is the cutting edge of the accountancy profession, and it's something that's very live at the moment and is evolving, and different countries at different rates and in different degrees of activity. And this poll result reflects that very, very clearly. So it's interesting that 9% of actually fully engaged with that reporting activity, but also 38% at the other end of the spectrum do not. So, and the rest are in the middle. Again, it's another interesting poll, and I think it's something that we can use to take forward as we think more and more about these things, and hopefully, again, more people will, as they engage in sustainability reporting, will take it on board, and that we will look a little bit later on at the sustainability reporting regime in this webinar and see how that's unpacking at the moment. So thank you for that. That's very useful and very interesting. Good to know. So, as I said before, I'm an accountant and auditor by background, and I think the context we should look at first of all is the international accountancy one, and see how the structures of accountancy fit in. This may be meat and drink to most of you, but anyway, I'm still going to just mention the structures of the global accounting profession. At the top of this structure is the International Federation of Accountants, that's IFAC. IFAC is the global body that governs the whole profession, based in the USA, but has members across the globe in all sorts of different places. And in most countries, there are subsidiary bodies that report to IFAC and participate in the IFAC regime. The International Financial Reporting Standards are a separate organization, but have a lot of affiliation with certain members of IFAC in certain countries. As we've just seen, certain countries are making great excuse me, great strides in that respect, and adopting the IFRS standards, which, to cut a long story short, are probably the best, the most advanced standards at the moment that affect reporting in the profession. There are two standards, S1 and S2. S1 is general sustainability issues, and S2 particularly relates to climate. Again, we'll look a little bit further into that as we go forward. On the auditing side, particularly in the public sector, I'm focused here, but there are private sector auditing issues as well. The the INTERSI, the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions. There are so many acronyms in this game. I hope that's not too demanding for you all. They have what's called the Working Group on Environmental Auditing. And that, again, is a very dynamic group, and they've produced a lot of good material in which you can access online. There's particularly good stuff from Latvia, I think, which is worth looking at. Lots of good training programs there to look for. In terms of internal audit, the COSO framework there provides a committee of standards in organizations, and that is another useful source of material. When we come down to individual countries, professional accountancy organizations are very numerous. In the UK, we have the organizations based on specialisms. So CIPFA, which is my organization, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, is the public sector body, but there are bodies for chartered accountants in England and Wales, Scotland and Ireland, and also certified accountants called ACCA, and also management accountants, that's CIMA. So many different ones. But across the world, for instance, in Rwanda, it's called ICPAR, the Institute of Chartered Public Accountants of Rwanda, and many others. And many countries have chartered institutes of various descriptions. So these organizations act as local sources of interest and relevance in the profession. Moving on. This is the third poll question, which I'm passing over to Amanda to administer.
Thank you, Peter. So let's launch this one. So, has your organisation implemented the IFRS or the ISSB standards S1 and S2? So we've got A, yes; B, no but plan to this year; C, no but plan to in the next 2 to 4 years; D, has not considered it yet; or E, we do not undertake sustainability reporting. Just wait for a few more seconds. Give it a few more. Okay. So we've got 7% that say A, 13% that say B, 13% again C, 47% have said D, and 20% have said E.
Right. So that's a slightly different version of the poll question number 2, but it's still showing the going down to the more granular detail of what we're talking about here. But there's an overall similar pattern, I think, to that implementation of this reporting requirement, and it's good again to get this spread of detail. There may be some countries where it's not being considered at all because the national the public accounting organization has decided not to follow the IFRS route, and that's very much allowed to. It's entirely up to them to do so. But there may be others that are doing that, and I know that a lot of countries, Ghana, Nigeria, Rwanda in Africa have gone along that line, and other countries in South America too, as well as the UK and some European countries. So it's it's still very much early days for the implementation and actual activities in that. But good, thank you very much for that. That's very useful. Let's carry on. I don't want to keep you going too slowly. Now we're going to look at more of the organizational implications, which is what was at the heart of this presentation. Looking at the 3 pillars of ESG across organizations. It has been represented that the people, planet, and profitability are the bottom line for organizations. I've added public finance in there to bring it into the public sector as well, but there are implications and impacts of how ESG impacts organisations and how they conduct their business, and what the future impacts might be upon. And the idea of people, planet, and profitability is at the core of all this. How your people are governed and the social implications of this go far beyond the norms of the old accounting, solely profit-driven activities. And obviously caring for the planet, we see a lot of issues around the environment and the planetary, the global issues that are being addressed and not addressed, and there's a lot of contentious issues there. Profitability is another one. There's been a range of issues around green investment and investment in the green activities, which are very prominent, and that is something that we can talk about as we go forward. In the public sector, there's again a slightly slower rate of uptake of all these issues, but it is catching on, and there are movements there. Let's move on. If we take the first of the three pillars, the environmental one, these are some of the factors that underpin the environment's pillar, and the first three are probably the most globally recognized and most important. Of these, nature and biodiversity are well known. The planet relies on a wide range of different plant and animal species to continue its development and provide medicines and welfare for the human population, if nothing else. But also the natural environment has lots of psychological and positive benefits there. You probably realize I'm coming at this much from an environmental perspective. My own background is I did geography, and I studied the environmental geography at university, and I'm very much keen to see these things reproduce and stay sustainable. Carbon emissions threaten nature, both natural nature and biodiversity, and climate change. And we've seen lots of evidence of climate change issues recently, with forest fires both in California and most recently in Japan, which are extraordinarily wide-ranging and perhaps unusual as climate change has come into play and global warming has taken effect. And there's been a lot of discussion globally at the COP events about this, the limiting the range of climate change to 1.5% and how that is threatened overall. But other factors are coming into play as well that I've listed on here: energy efficiency, pollution control, waste reduction, and water resources. In the UK, we've had, even in developed countries, these things matter. We've had lots of flooding, and flooding brings its own problems with sewage systems and sewage being pumped into water systems that therefore pollute rivers and cause many problems. So this is not a developing country only issue. There's many issues coming into developed countries, and we mustn't ignore or consider it in those blinkered bilateral concerns. If we look at the next slide, we can see some good practice on the environmental side coming from various parts of the world. One of the most recent good practice issues that has come up has been that Rwanda, through ICPA, as I said before, mentioned them before, the chartered accountants in Rwanda, they have produced a green taxonomy. A taxonomy is a classification of all the green enterprises and the green issues arising that affect the finance sector in Rwanda, in a way that they can classify things and therefore take appropriate action to bring things forward. Now, green taxonomy is a useful tool to sort out and put into policy terms what needs to be done. This has also been done in Ghana and Nigeria as well, I think. So there's a lot going on in this field. The one in Rwanda particularly was being supported by the German government, which is a good thing to see. Even at times when international aid is under threat from financing, we see that some good work is carrying on and hopefully will carry on in future. In Kenya, there's an organization called Arosha, which is doing a lot of good work in the environmental sphere, doing research and monitoring of birds, the sea life, and plastics in the sea, to say but 3 of their activities. They're very much linked into an organization that covers many other countries in Africa too, and they're doing good work to support the environment. Closer to home in Europe, the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, has a green hub and a green transition policy, and it's moving from its heartland. It started off in its activities in Southeast Europe, but has moved to North Africa and to the Middle East, and is now going to Sub-Saharan Africa. Nigeria has just applied for membership, as has Benin and I think some of the other countries in that region. So there are movements from the banking sector to take action in the environmental sphere. So there's a lot going on there, and again, if you look at their website, you'll see a lot more activity. I'm sorry I don't have time here to go into great detail about what they're doing, but there's an awful lot of work they have done, including work in Chernobyl, for example, protecting the reactor from radiation leaks. Awful lot of activity, very good activity, good practice. If we look at the social factors, sorry, I've got a slightly gruff throat here. You can see some examples here. Again, these are good social practices: consumer protection, diversity, health and safety. Health and safety is a UK term for the way that organizations look after and protect their employees and make sure that they don't encounter any dangers at work. Human rights, inclusion, labor laws that are positive and supportive of social development, and the supply chain. Traditionally, these are very well developed in some European countries, particularly the Scandinavian countries. They're probably more developed than they are in the UK, but they are all very important. And again, they've been ignored to some degree and not reported on in the past by accounting organizations, but they're now coming more and more into prominence. So I think there's a lot going on, a lot to see. If we take a couple of examples of some good practice there, I was involved in a project called Uganda Surge, which was looking at gender and equity budgeting and support for gender and equity in Uganda. And one of the good practices there was that non-governmental organizations provided shelters for women affected by gender-based violence, and that's a good social thing to be doing. And again, that happens in many countries as well, and with support from donors, but also with local initiatives. So it's a good thing to be doing. Another one is in Ghana, which I just happened to encounter. Again, there's many more you can find examples of across the world. The Ghanaian example was Action Aid, which is an international NGO. It does a lot of support to work and communities with disabilities. Again, this is part of the social fabric of the countries that needs to be dealt with and covers in this arena. If we talk about governance, the third of the pillars, again, these are the sorts of areas that we're talking about: business ethics, anti-corruption, anti-money laundering. The one that's probably most appropriate here is the organizational structure and the board composition, making sure that there's a balance between interested parties and stakeholders. Organizational structures and arrangements are often skewed, or in the past were skewed very much towards the profit-making side of things and towards old structures. New arrangements can be made to balance things out and to make things as efficient and effective as possible. And we see that even in organizations that don't maybe have many environmental implications or perhaps social implications, but in the public sector, this is an area that can be developed quite well. And we've had experience of visiting organisations in the UK public sector where this is very live, and has been many improvements have been done. Equal pay is important for inclusive groups, so that men and women get the same pay, which in some countries doesn't happen and has historically been a problem. And risk and compliance. Good organisations undertake risk-based activities and maximize their efforts on the riskiest areas and deal with compliance issues appropriately, so they comply with laws and regulations that apply to them. Again, let's have a look at some good examples across the developing world. Again, picking a couple out for further consideration. There's an organization called AFRISI-E, another one of these acronyms. It's the English-speaking African Supreme Audit Institutions organization. In their strategic plan, the current one that's going from 2025 to 2029, ethics is a very strong pillar which auditors obviously need to be part of. Auditors need to be independent. They need to be ethical in their dealings and fair, dealing with all sorts of things. So again, that's a very important part of what goes on. Elsewhere in Africa, we look at, there's a think tank in Ghana called Imani, which has done many critical reports into many public institutions dealing with a whole range of issues, such as public finance and imbalances, and dealing with corruption and all sorts of things. And they take a great risk, and they put their head above the parapet, and are very much, they're often criticized by the political parties, but they do take on these critical roles, and that is a good thing. So the civil society and governance are very important, dealing with opening things up for reporting on. I want to keep moving because this is a time limited event. Across different sectors, we're now looking at different sectors rather than organizations that we've just previously addressed. ESG does have a different has been implemented in different speeds, and I think the polls have reflected that to a degree so far, and we can see that given the range of responses that these things have become different in different places depending on where you work. So the private sector has definitely led the way in ESG implementation. This is primarily a result of the massive investment and green bonds and the previous consensus that was very much dynamic under previous American-led situations. The climate awareness has really been a new paradigm to stimulate this new way of thinking, and investment bonds have released trillions of dollars of investment across the globe for environmental projects and encouraging good behavior on the part of all sorts of private sector entities. And we've now seen the reporting standards and reporting catching up, as well as assurance on the reporting. Assurance is a posh word for auditing, audit providing confidence that what is being reported is appropriate. But the downside to that is this notion of greenwashing or green hushing. Again, I'm breezing over these topics, which are in themselves would make a whole webinar on their own. But greenwashing and green hushing are the negative side of reporting. Some companies like to promote themselves as very green and very idealistic in this department, but actually they are not, and they actually contribute to environmental deterioration, but they try and present themselves in the best way. So it's up to the audit and the insurance people, there's people that write the standards and try to assure that the reports are doing well, are appropriate, that to try and pierce that greenwashing canopy and try and make sure that that what is reported is accurate and fair and trustworthy. And there's again quite a dynamic in all of that needs to be addressed. Moving on, the public sector, ESG awareness and consideration, again, it develops in many public sector organizations across the world in many different ways. And I think that is reflected by the diversity of the audience we have today. It is increasingly being recognized and engaged with, but there are massive variances depending on the finance available to cope with geopolitical issues and to respond to, say, the COPs. A lot of developing countries find it very difficult to finance green responses and to finance governance issues and to face up to the realities of these things. And they look for reciprocal funding from the richer world. But the richer world is also going through crises of financing as well. So there's a kind of there are tensions here. Let's put it that way. Before we go too far, but there are accountability issues across the public sector which lead the debate here. Reporting standards in the public sector are not fully finalized yet or established. They are being developed, and there has been a consultation which finished at the end of last month, so 6 days ago. And now the IPSAS board, another acronym, the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board, which is part of IFAC, is considering the reporting standards for this, and has put out a consultation which has been largely welcomed by serious participants, with a few exceptions, things like perhaps extending the green agenda a bit further into that, but mostly welcomed. But it's been a bit on the slow lane. But public sector organizations, again, like to present themselves in the best possible light, so they are open to greenwashing and green hushing as well. So we have to be aware as observers in all this that there is a lot more going on than meets the eye, perhaps. What I call the third sector, which is the non-governmental and civil society sector, is also heavily involved in the ESG agenda, and often maybe a little bit further advanced in some respects than the public sector, because there are specialized interests. There are interest groups in and advocates of the environment, as I've said before, in specific areas, and also in the political arena, and in advocacy for things like disabled people, for gender and all sorts of balances of those sorts. So there's a very varied and multi-layered picture of international roles and influences across there. The reporting requirements for the third sector are less stringent than the public and private sectors, but they are still there, and they will evolve over time as we come to face up to them. So I'm now going to pass back to Amanda for the fourth and final.
Thank you, Peter. So let's launch this poll. So, which element of ESG represents the greatest challenge to your organization? A, environment, B, social, C, governance, or D, we have not addressed these challenges. So I'll leave the poll open for a few seconds. See some good results coming through. Let's give it a few more seconds. Okay. So we've got 35% that says A, environment, 6% have said B, social, 35% have said C, governance, and we've got 24% that has said D, we have not addressed these challenges.
Right. Well, that's again an interesting result. So environment and governance top the scores of interest, and that again is probably not too surprising in some ways, because those are the ones that affect most organisations as they go forward. Social ones I've found as well in the UK are less prominent, but perhaps may come up the agenda as time goes on. And it's interesting that only a relatively small number have not yet addressed these challenges. So that again is very interesting, and all good material for us to weigh up and as we go forward. But thank you very much for those responses, everybody. Let's go on. One of the main areas that we're looking at here is ethics, codes of practice about ethics. Some professions are very stringent about codes of practice, and others are less so. So let's have a look and see what we've got here. As we've talked about, my core issue is the accountancy profession, and accountancy institutes are very much focused on ethics. There's IFAC has ethical standards which apply to accountants. Those non-accountants here may be surprised at that, and the accounting profession might have quite a poor reputation, but in fact it is quite a stringent set of requirements and ethical standards, and if those are breached, people face disciplinary action. So just think about that. And reporting an audit is also part of this, but in terms of the ethics that are concerned with the environment and with social and governance, but perhaps less so. But the environmental ones require a lot more expertise from the accountants than they previously had, and accountants are generally regarded as quite conservative and not particularly open-minded, perhaps, but they should be, and they will be increasingly required to think more broadly about all these issues as they go forward. Some of the other professions, like engineers, do have ethical standards, and they are quite engineers and lawyers, etc., are very structured, as are bankers. But environmentalists tend not to be structured in the same way, the same configuration. So there is a difference between the different people. But environmentalists can have a big impact and support the development of expertise and give their expertise to these other professions as we go forward. The transitions are very important as we look to move the debate on, and these various professional interests are manifesting in the transitions that particularly the banking sector is developing, and EBRD being luminous in that department. But some of the other banks, the World Bank as well, and the other international development banks like the Inter-American Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the African Development Bank, they're all looking at these areas and structuring themselves. And as I said before, think tanks are very supportive in different countries in different ways. So I'm going to go towards winding up now in this part of the presentation, just to stimulate some thinking. Increasingly, there has been criticism of ESG amongst the business community as it looks to maximize profits. There's always been this tension between the environment, social and governance debate and the profiteering traditionalists, as it were, of the capitalist world. And you'll see here I've mentioned BP, that's formerly British Petroleum, the big oil company. They have changed very recently. They've changed direction strategically away from supporting sustainable fuels and sustainable developments and biofuels and all these things that they were doing, and wind and solar power, because their profit margins took a dip compared with the traditional energy companies like Shell and particularly Exxon. Exxon had a huge profit margin reported last year, compared with a bit less for Shell, and BP's was well down in comparison. So the shareholders have risen up and asked for BP to rescind its environmental credentials, as it were, and go back. So that's part of this criticism, but that's very short-termist and very well, negative in terms of the environment, perhaps. But it may be a reaction to the popularism that we've seen from the election in America, where there's a new president, as we're all aware, has rescinded his membership of the Paris Accord, which was about climate change and setting net zero as a target. And this is really a reflection of this new realism of the popularist world, which we're all coming to adjust in very many ways, and it's quite a shock for the system. So the old liberal values that underpinned the ESG agenda are now being challenged quite majorly. So there's that level of challenge is overpinning and overarching, and we see other threats and other discordances, which I mentioned just previously as well, between the developed and the developing worlds around the COP funding and funding of initiatives to react to the environmental stresses and perhaps lesser degree to governance and social stresses. So again, there are tensions all around. There are many discussion points which we could address and many questions that you could raise, and I hope you will raise them as we go forward, and we'll try and address them, if not in this forum, but in future forums. Are these threats to ESG existential? I think they are. I think the planet and the people rely on a clean planet and clean water and good environments to survive and to be sustainable. And I've yet to see any scientific evidence that disproves that. The scientific evidence all points to the fact that we are destroying the planet, and we need to react to that. So these realist and liberalist divisions are very, very important, very, very major threats to us all. I'm not going to do too much more on that. My conclusion is that ESG is here to stay, despite the threats to it. Organisations that ignore it do so at their own peril, and investment is threatened as a result, to take just one aspect of that. But there's a lot at stake, and these 4 Ps here indicate that direction. Again, I'm not going to over egg the omelette. We do have a workshop covering these issues in November, I think, this year, and you're very welcome to attend. I won't dwell on these next slides that detail what the workshop offers, but you can look at the website and pick up the issues. So thank you very much for listening. I've spoken on for 40 minutes, and I think that's enough from me at the moment, and we'll try and address the questions, and I'll hand over to Amanda.
Thank you, Peter. So we do have quite a few questions in. The first question is from Mohammed, and he is asking, what is the framework for ESG assignment or assignments?
Assessment. Yes. The framework for assessment is that comes in the, if I can understand the question, I think you're referring to the assessment by the standards raising bodies. If I'm correct, please correct me if I'm not, Mohammed. But assessment is about looking at the firstly, the environmental issues. Let's just take environment, because that's the key one. And the framework is the COP process, which looks at how environments have been affected by climate change and by the increase in temperatures that are resulted from the release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere due to industrialization. And the framework has evolved through the science of all that. And it's quite a complex issue and area to contend with, and for me to deal with it now is quite difficult. I've been not being an environmental specialist in that department, but we can look at the questionnaires and things on that, as you raise in some of your other questions, and follow-up questions.
Are you carried on, Peter, or do you want me to start on to the next question?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is from
Go
Florestine.
on for the next one. Yeah,
And Florestine is asking, how forceful are
Yeah.
donor organisations with the implementation of the sustainability reporting process when granting funds to third world countries or any country as a matter of fact?
Very good question, Florestine. Thank you for that. It's a very interesting dynamic that the donor organizations at the moment across the globe are under great threat from their funding. And we see that in many countries, as both in Europe and America, particularly in America, that historically the donor organizations were quite forceful, I think, and quite keen to include sustainability issues in their work. And the World Bank particularly has and still continues to include conditionalities of sustainability in its activities. But the developing world is slightly resistant to these things, so there's again a tension there. But I think donor organizations could be more forceful if they had more funding. And the trouble is that the UK government has just taken funding away from the donor organization that they had, and absorbed it within the diplomatic organizations. And some of the European ones, judging by your name, I think you might have some French connections, or Swiss perhaps. Certainly the donors in France and Germany are being restricted financially, and that's maybe going to be a continuing theme. So I think it's something that the donors would like to do, but I think they could do more of, because sustainability reporting is important for the developing countries, and any country, in fact. So as you say, so it's not just developing countries. I think all countries need to address reporting and engage in it fully.
Okay, thank you, Peter. The next question is from Brenda, and Brenda is asking, who can really think about ESG when there are so many wars and geopolitical threats at the moment?
Indeed, that's a very broad and dynamic question. Thank you, Brenda. ESG is considered something of a luxury by some organizations and some countries, but war is one of the most destructive and damaging aspects of attacking all the elements of sustainability. It affects the environment massively, it affects social relations, it affects governance. War is obviously a very demanding and dangerous thing. So there are threats across the board, and it's beholden on all of us, I think, to react and to hold true to the ESG agenda, because if we don't, there's nothing going to be left when we come to think about our grandchildren who will inherit the world that we've created. So we all have political voices, or most of us have political voices that we can raise, and we should think about how we do that. Again, I don't want to get too political, because it does get very political. But in my opinion, should we say, let's put it that way. I think we should address this carefully and think very, very cautiously about who we support in the ballot box as we go forward. So I would urge you all to vote, of course, and to take your chances there if you have the chance, but to vote with big picture in mind and not solely
this is
on
actually a comment more rather than a question, and this is from Shiraz, and saying that we should add dis and misinformation as well.
Yes, we should. I totally agree. And information is that the data and information are at the at the core of everything we deal with. And there's lots of disinformation flying around online from various sources, which I won't go into necessarily, but it is a very big concern. So Shiraz, so thank you for raising that, because a lot of contentious issues arise that contradict or appear to contradict the scientific consensus. But I think the scientific consensus on the environment particularly is so strong that it's unimpeachable. It is actually very, very strong, and people that dish that are countering something that's a lot of truth in it. So I think we should definitely counter that when we can, and look to solid basis of information, solid data, solid.
Okay, I've got one more question, and this is from Gloria. And Gloria is asking, if I work in the hospitality industry, what are the key areas I should be presenting in my sustainability report to my board?
Hospitality, well, that's a good one. I'd like to work in the hospitality industry myself, I must say. The key, that's a very specific one, and I have to think about a little bit about it beforehand. But in hospitality, you'd be looking at things like the supply chains. Does your industry, I don't know, let's say you're working in a hotel or a bar or a company that provides food and drink and convivial activities. If you're in those circumstances, do your suppliers, are they green suppliers, or are they destroying the environment themselves? Are they actually not behaving well? Are they not doing good? And also, you should be looking at your own governance. Do you respect the equality of people by race, religion, gender? All of those things come into play. That's it's in any industry. And are the conditions of employment good? That's in hospitality. Often the conditions of employment are not so good, and people have poor conditions and are treated badly. So you should be reporting on those attributes. So you should be reporting on all three: the environment, the social, and the governance sides of things, to make sure that you get a balanced picture, that the board understands what's going on, and you're not just reporting to your board, which is important if you're reporting internally, but there might be external reports required under the accounting regime that go to the public and your investors. And in hospitality, you want shareholders and other people to invest and to continue the investment. So that's a very good question, Gloria, and I'm very glad you added it, because investment will depend on the respect that which your company is measured with in the market. So again, a good
sorry,
one.
Peter. Yeah, that was the end of our questions, actually.
Actually, if I sorry to interrupt you. If I could just come back in. Actually, there was a comment, I think, from Mohammed, and I think, Mohammed, you're from USAID, if I have that right. But a comment about US and UK aid, I guess, but perhaps the governments in particular moving out of green initiatives. And also, I think Mohammed earlier on wondered about how you see the future of ESG, given the proposed cuts to or existing cuts already in US and then newly announced UK aid. So is that something, Peter, you've got some thoughts about?
I have. Well, again, we have it in the UK. I can only talk about the UK particularly, but I know that the US cuts are very contentious, and there's lots of litigation going on at the moment about the state of the US. But in the UK, there's in the UK cabinet, the government is a cabinet government. The cuts to aid have been very much contested internally, I think, but the green initiatives are very important, and the green initiatives are considered as an economic opportunity as well for developing technologies and developing good employment opportunities for many new initiatives, both research, development, and building new sites for wind power, electric motors, all these things. So they're not moving out of the green initiatives. I think they're trying to combine the two, and it's a very difficult balance. And I think, Mohammed, you've been very assiduous in addressing these things, and I think these answers are not simple, and I can't, in the time available, really go into the detail of them. But I think they're worth debating and continuing the debate forward, because at the moment there are great threats in the short term, perhaps, but the longer term they will have to address the issues, because the green debate is not going away. That would be my
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you. And if we've missed anything by any chance, any questions or comments or requests, we will certainly do some follow-up and get back to you. But thank you, Peter. Thank you very much for the excellent presentation and some very interesting ideas. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon, our time, and taking part in the polls, and a lot of very good and searching questions. So you saw on an earlier slide, I think, that we are running a 1-week workshop in November on ESG. Peter's going to be leading that. It's a new program for us, so we're looking forward enormously to exploring some of these areas in a bit more detail over the course of five working days. Do come and join us if you can. You're welcome to join online if you can't make it in person. And if there are other colleagues that you have, then please let them know. They're normally very good mixture of briefings, visits, if we can get visits to practitioners, and a good opportunity for benchmarking and networking. So we hope to maybe meet some of you later on in the year. In the meantime, just once again, thank you so much for joining, and please give us your feedback. I think there's a space on the software to make comments and feedback, so that's always welcome. And thank you to my colleague Amanda as well for hosting us, and wish you a very good day the rest of the day. Then we'll say goodbye for now. So thank you very much again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.